see you soon.
Final Destination 3, the novelization by Christa Faust. Chapter 18. Kevin sat on the end of his bed. He was showered, shaved, and dressed, but it was still only 8:15 a.m. Kevin, who was always late, who always hit the snooze on his alarm 2 or 3 times too many, was sitting there ready to go, 45 minutes before Wendy was supposed to pick him up. His belly was raw with anxiety and too much coffee, and the quiet house just set his nerves on edge. His mind was racing a mile a minute, complex emotions fighting like dogs inside his nauseous belly. His dad had long since gone off to work, and his mom was busy with the never-ending chores generated by a household containing 4 teenage boys. His youngest brother, 13-year-old Ryan, had left for a soccer camp the week before. 15-year-old Adam and 16-year-old Hart were both still sleeping. But even if his entire family were awake and sitting right there beside Kevin, he knew that they could offer him no real comfort. They had not even been able to deal with Kevin's very normal grief over the loss of Carrie and Jason. There was no way they would be able to handle the increasingly sinister, inexplicable, and, come on, admit it, supernatural things that were piling up all around him. Kevin felt more alone than ever, and found himself ridiculously eager to see Wendy. He checked the time on the alarm clock on his bedside table, and his eye was drawn to a framed picture of him and Carrie from last Halloween. He had been dressed as the Joker, and she as Harley Quinn. She looked devastatingly sexy in her skin-tight black and red catsuit, and she was looking up at him with wide, adoring eyes, like he was the only guy in the universe. He turned away from the photo with a flush of guilt, and caught the reflection of himself in the full-length mirror on the back of his door. Without even realizing it, he had put on his best shirt, a sleek blue button-down that fit tight against his muscular frame, and had short sleeves that showed off his brawny arms to their best advantage. It was the precise blue of his eyes, and Carrie had loved it on him, saying it gave her bad thoughts. His mom had to sew the buttons back on more than once when Carrie had ripped them off. Now Carrie was dead, and he was the one having bad thoughts about his dead best friend's girlfriend. Kevin hung his head, missing Carrie with a sudden intensity that felt like a kick to the stomach. She would have laughed at the absurdity of it all. She had never been the jealous type, mostly because of her unshakable confidence that no one else could rock his world the way she could. She had been right, too, but now she was gone, and he was more confused and conflicted with every passing minute. He reached for the drawer that held the ring he had bought for her. He started to open the drawer and then stopped, took a deep breath, and slid it closed again. He felt like the lowest piece of shit on the planet. "I'm sorry, baby," he said to Carrie's picture, not even entirely sure what he was apologizing for. She didn't respond, of course. He closed his eyes and covered them with his hand. He and Carrie had never had a perfect relationship. Far from it. They were always fighting, breaking up, and getting back together. But he loved her, he really did. He knew that he could be a jerk sometimes, most of the time even, and he had been determined to treat her better, to make it up to her over the summer, to show her the kind of mature commitment he knew she longed for. But in his heart, he had known that he was the one who needed to hang on to something that was already slipping into the past. The ring had been a foolish act of desperation, an attempt to cement what he knew was already irreparably damaged. He had been lying to himself, and the fact that she was dead couldn't change that bitter truth. Just like he couldn't change his sudden, overpowering feelings for Wendy. It was really completely ridiculous. She wasn't anything like his type, so skinny and serious, and he would never have dreamed of touching her while Jay was alive. So why couldn't he get her out of his mind? Why did he find himself replaying that violent, hungry kiss over and over in his head? There was so much pent-up passion inside her virginal body, and the thought of being the one to open her up and let it out was arousing beyond all reason. But that powerful sexual attraction was only the tip of the iceberg. When she had leaned her head against his chest in her truck, Kevin had realized with sudden clarity that he would die to protect her. He had always thought that was some kind of overwrought soap opera bullshit, to say that you would die for someone. But holding Wendy and feeling her breathing against him, trusting him to take care of her, he knew in his heart that it was true. They were up against some fucked up scary shit. Who knew what could happen next or how this madness was going to play out over the next 24 hours? Kevin only knew that they had to beat it. They had to find a way. If only they could make it down to State and warn Lewis in time. Maybe the pattern would be broken, and then Wendy would be safe. Kevin looked back at the clock. 8:47. He sighed and stood, giving himself a critical once-over in the mirror. He fussed with his hair and smoothed down his gut, and then, realizing he was acting like he was going on a date, he dropped his hands to his sides, only to reach up and mess around with the hair over his forehead again a few seconds later, wondering if he needed a haircut. It was completely stupid. They had bigger things to worry about than Kevin's hair or his less than perfectly ripped abs. Disgusted with himself, he pushed the door to his bedroom open and went down the stairs to wait out front for Wendy. When her truck rounded the corner at precisely 9 a.m., Kevin's heart burned rubber inside his chest. He waved and then looked down, embarrassed. She pulled up and thumbed the automatic locks. He pulled the passenger door open and climbed inside. The clean interior of the cab smelled like her, a tart and delicate odor, like a fresh-cut apple, and Kevin was assaulted with a fiercely visceral memory of holding her close the night before. "Hey," he said. "Hi," she responded, big liquid brown eyes meeting his for only a fraction of a second before looking away. She shivered slightly, and he wanted very badly to hug her, but her body language was distant and chilly, unwelcoming. Had he only imagined that she wanted him? Was it just wishful thinking? She put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb in silence. The campus of the State University was about 30 minutes south of McKinley High, if you went the speed limit. Wendy, who drove 95 miles per hour with a cold intensity, precise and brutally aggressive, cutting off anyone who got in her way, made the trip in under 15 minutes, with Kevin clinging to the door handles and gritting his teeth the whole way. When they arrived, miraculously in one piece, Kevin directed her toward the back of the campus where the athletic buildings stood. They parked in the deserted lot of the stadium, the home of the Sultans. Wendy clutched Kevin's arm when they got out of her truck and looked up at the big billboard above the gates. It was a stylized logo of a swarthy Sinbad-looking guy with a turban and a pointed beard above a pair of crossed scimitars. It almost looked as if the swords had chopped the Sultan's head off. The skittering dread in Kevin's belly was nearly drowned out by the feel of Wendy's strong fingers sliding over the soft spot inside his elbow. It was the first time she had touched him since the night before, and this casual contact was intensely distracting. She let go of his arm and dug through her bag, pulling out the sheaf of pictures. Sorting quickly through the pile, she found the one of Lewis at the strongman game. She held it up to compare it with the big painting on the stadium wall. "Those swords look almost exactly like the ones in Lewis's picture." Kevin looked up and checked out the picture. Yeah, he said, anxiety climbing. "Great." "We better find him," she said. He looked around the bustling sprawl, struggling to orient himself. "If I remember right," he gestured with his chin, "the team room is in the Brockman building. This way, come on." They started toward a cluster of low two-story buildings lining one side of a series of athletic practice fields. Football, baseball, soccer, and lacrosse teams were out on the fields practicing and running drills. Wendy and Kevin tried to spot Lewis's massive frame among all the moving bodies, but couldn't find him. They came at last to the Brockman building, a windowless brick bunker with glass doors at one end. Kevin pushed his way through the doors, and Wendy followed him, and then paused, wrinkling her nose at the funky old sock smell of a locker room, a stench that was intimately familiar to Kevin, but clearly new to her. He smiled a little and took her arm. "Don't be scared, Wendy," he said. "I know the land of the Jock tribe. They may seem strange and frightening to an outsider, but lucky for you, you have a trusty native guide. This way, miss." There was an office to the left side door, and it was propped open with a rubber stopper. Kevin led Wendy into the office and then stepped up to the counter. Behind it, big middle-aged men in shorts and polo shirts were talking on phones and looking over rosters. One of them, a gray-haired ex-jock with a hard round paunch and a big walrus mustache, looked up over his bifocals. The plastic sign on his desk read, Mr. Beeson. "Help you?" he asked. Yes, sir," said Kevin. I'm looking for a guy named Luis Romero. He's here at football camp from McKinley." Mr. Beeson frowned. Yep, well now," he said. "There's no visitors at the camp, you know. These kids are here to work." Wendy seemed panicky and ready to lose it, but Kevin shot her a quick look, trying to physically calm her, then returned his attention to Mr. Beeson. "Well, sir," he said, trying desperately to think, "it's a family emergency. We tried to reach him on the phone, but couldn't. There's been an accident." Mr. Beeson still looked skeptical. "You don't look like Romero's," he said. "Neither of you." Wendy clenched her fist in palpable frustration, but Kevin soldiered on unfazed. "I'm his teammate at McKinley, sir, tight end." Wendy stifled a laugh at the phrase, tight end, and Kevin kicked her under the counter. "Our team is closer than family." The older man nodded. He was listening now, so Kevin continued. "Lewis's little brother George is a shoo-in for quarterback in the fall. Well, George was hit by a car while riding his bike to his summer job this morning. It doesn't look good. They're afraid he'll never run again. The kid's conscious, but he's losing hope. He doesn't want to live if he can't play. See, their dad left them when they were kids. Lewis's mom and sisters are with him now, but he needs his big brother. George idolizes Lewis. Lewis is the only one that can snap him out of it. Man to man, you know?" Mr. Beeson nodded, his thick white eyebrows drawn together. "Sure, yeah, of course," he said. "A boy needs his big brother in a situation like that, no doubt." He looked over at a white dry erase board on the wall beside him. "The rookies are all over on the far end of Field C, hitting the pads. That's back out the door and to the left. Last field you'll come to. Go see Majors, the assistant coach over there. He'll find your buddy for you." "Thank you, sir," Kevin said. He pushed away from the desk and spun to the door. Wendy followed silently. "And tell that little brother to buck up and think positive," Mr. Beeson called after them. "We all have setbacks, but there's no excuse to be a quitter." Yes, sir," said Kevin. "You bet." "I didn't know Lewis had a little brother named George," Wendy said as they ran out of the glass doors and started down the long sidewalk that ran along the fields. He doesn't," Kevin said. "Man, you're good," Wendy said, shaking her head. "If it was just me alone, I'd be screwed. I don't speak a word of jock." "So you're finally acknowledging that my jock background does have value?" Kevin asked, teasing. "Maybe a little," she admitted with a shrug. They continued down the walk for a few steps when Wendy turned to him with a frown. "Wait a minute," she said. George Romero? As in Night of the Living Dead?" She laughed. "You're lucky that old guy wasn't a horror movie fan or anything." Kevin shrugged. "What can I say?" he replied. "That was the first name that popped into my head." He paused. "I'm surprised you even know who George Romero is." She turned away with a Mona Lisa smile. "You're not the only one with hidden depth," she said. He laughed and then let it trail off when he saw her face go suddenly icy pale, her eyes wide. "What?" he asked, feeling a cold rush of adrenaline. "Oh, this is bad," she said. "This is so bad." "Bad?" asked Kevin. "What do you mean bad?" "Of course it's bad, or do you mean... Are you saying badder than it already is?" Wendy nodded, eyes bright and terrified. "Badder than it already is, yeah," she said. It feels like it's already happening. Like right now. We have to hurry." Kevin doubled his speed, breaking into a light run. Wendy, skinny though she was, seemed to be having no trouble keeping up with him. A sign marked Field G came into view, and beyond it the field itself. Big, burly guys in helmets, practice jerseys, and shorts were taking turns charging tackling skids and driving them back with the strength of their legs and the power of their shoulders. Wendy and Kevin scanned the players on the field looking for Lewis, but With their helmets on, it was hard to tell one jock from another. The assistant coach, Mr. Majors, a short, wiry black man in the uniform of white shorts, polo shirt, and a white mesh golf hat, stood near the skids with a clipboard and pen. He was shouting a lot and occasionally blowing the whistle that he wore around his neck. Wendy and Kevin jogged across the field toward him. "That sucked, Nadoff!" shouted Majors, as two linebackers ran back from the pads and returned to the back of the line. "My mama can hit harder than that, and she's 82 with a wooden leg. Try using that beef for something other than swinging your dick around." Excuse me?" Kevin said, stepping up to the older man's shoulder, not looking forward to this. Coach Majors?" Major gave him a perfunctory glance, then turned his attention to the next pair of behemoths that were racing toward the skids. "What do you want?" Majors snapped. "I'm in the middle of practice here." Behind him, Wendy kept craning her neck, trying to spot Lewis among the helmeted boys on the field. She was practically vibrating with anxiety and impatience. "Sorry, sir," Kevin said, "but Mr. Beeson said we should come talk to you. We're looking for Louis Romero. There's been a family emergency." "Who?" Majors asked. "Romero?" He spat into the balding grass at his feet. "That big dumb sack of shit is his own walking family emergency. Stupid idiot." A chill shot through Kevin. Had something awful already happened? Were they too late? "What do you mean, sir?" Kevin asked, trying to keep his voice cool. "You saying he isn't here?" "I sent him in to hit the weights until he could chill the fuck out," said Majors out of the side of his mouth. His eyes never left the field. "He got in Capino's face, started throwing punches. An attitude like that ain't going to get him nowhere but junior college. He's not getting on my team if he doesn't get his head together, that's for sure." "And where is the weight room, sir?" Kevin asked. "We need to find him right away." "Stawson Building," Majors replied, pointing vaguely back the way they had come. "Round the back of the Brockman Building. Weight room is in the basement." Wendy groaned. They had been right next to Lewis and run all the way in the wrong direction. Kevin could feel the tension coming off of her in waves. Her lower lip clenched tight between her teeth. "Great," said Kevin, groaning inwardly. "Thank you, sir." He turned and started trotting away across the field again. Major shouted after them, "And you tell Mr. Romero that he is not leaving until he finishes his sets. I don't care who died." "This is a nightmare," Wendy said as they ran back down the walkway. "We're never going to find him." "We'll find him," Kevin said. "I just hope we're not—" "Don't say it," said Wendy, eyes wide. "Please." They found the Stawson Building across a small stretch of grass behind the Brockman Building and banged, sweating and breathing hard, through the doors, then clattered down the steps to the basement. The basement hallway was long and painted a pale institutional green, and smelled of gym clothes and rubber mats and muscle rub. Through a door to the left they could see a group of bantamweight wrestlers practicing their moves. As they started down the hall, Kevin could hear Lewis's distinctive, ostentatious grunting, hissing, and bellowing as he slung more weight than Kevin could pull with his truck. Wendy's face went white at the raw, animalistic sound. "Oh my God," she said, speeding up. "We're too late, he's dying." Kevin shook his head and put a hand on her shoulder, suppressing a smile. "He's fine," Kevin said. "He's just going heavy." Wendy slowed and looked back at the weight room door. "Are you sure?" she asked, brows creased with anxiety. "It sounds awful." "Sure, I'm sure," Kevin said. "I've worked out with that rhino plenty of times. He could bench press your whole family." Now that they seemed within reach of their goal, Kevin found himself reluctant to go through with it, suddenly uncomfortable and unsure. "Man," he said, "he's going to think we're both on crack coming in here all wild-eyed and sweaty with these crazy-sounding stories." "He'll come around," Wendy said, pushing ahead of Kevin. "I thought you were on crack whenever you told me at first." Kevin nodded and shrugged. He took in a deep breath and followed her as she pushed the doors open. Coach Majors had clearly had it out for Lewis from day one. The shrimpy little fucker was trying to make up for his lack of size in the attitude department, and he had been all up in Lewis's face like a bitch with PMS from the second they met. So maybe Lewis was a little edgy. So what? It was no big deal. The jump from the short cycles of oral Winstrol that he'd been doing for the past year up to his new oil-based injectable stack was shredding him up like a motherfucker. It had piled muscle on top of muscle and was finally carving the gut he'd fought so hard to lose into a nice chunky six-pack. But it had also kicked his temper into high gear. Every little thing pissed him off, and it seemed like he was getting into fights every time he turned around. Of course, pretty much everybody in the joint was on the juice, coaches included, so it's not like he was the only one. Steroids were a given in the sport, and never mind all the bullshit about testing and fines and zero tolerance. So what the hell was Coach Major's problem? Lewis shrugged and slapped another set of plates on the leg press. That made 12 per side for a sick total of 1,080 fucking pounds. If Coach Majors thought sending Lewis to the weight room was some kind of punishment, he was stupid on top of being an asshole. Lewis loved working out, loved pushing himself harder and harder, and seeing the immediate eye-popping results as his steroid-infused muscles grew more enormous every day. No one in the building could top Lewis, especially on legs, and as he sat down beneath the killer load on the leg press, he looked around the deserted weight room, disappointed to see that he was still alone. Too bad no one was there to witness this last set. Lewis loved making the wimpy little wrestlers and soccer players go crying home to mama with his unbeatable feats of strength. Shrugging, he cranked up the volume on his iPod, and with 50 Cent blasting in his earbuds, he placed both feet on the platform and popped off the lock that held the weights up above him. With a massive grunt, he powered out the first couple of reps. His quads were on fire, screaming, and he strained against the platform, going real deep and letting out a louder, wordless sound each time until he was nearly hollering. The last 5 nearly killed him, and when he finally got the last one up and slammed the lock in place, he thought for sure he was going to puke. Slowly rolling onto his side and letting his shuddering legs down to the ground, he sat for a long minute, waiting for the nausea to pass. He didn't see that the lock beneath him was not fully engaged. It held, but just barely. The slightest touch would flip it up again and send 1,080 pounds crashing down on the person in the seat. Lewis did not notice as he pulled himself to his feet, legs shaking so badly they could barely support his weight. Bracing himself against the wall just below a sign that read, "Your mother doesn't work here. Rack your weights when you have finished your set." Lewis reached for his shaker cup of muscle milk, popped open the lid, and took a swig. It was getting warm, but still tasted pretty damn good. Way better than those other brands of powdered protein drinks that he'd tried. It was almost like a real milkshake. He took a second swig and sneered at the sign. Lewis never racked his weights, for one thing, because he was spent after a set like that and didn't feel like bothering. And for another, he wanted to make sure that the next person who came in saw the monstrous number of plates he had been using. He wanted them to feel like the punk-ass bitches they were when they had to take off more than half of Lewis's weights before they could do their own little girly sets. Turning away from the leg press, Lewis checked out his arms in the mirror and spontaneously decided to do a little extra tricep work. He was never satisfied with his triceps. They were stubborn and seemed to grow at half the speed of his biceps, no matter how hard he blasted them. He closed the lid on the shaker cup and set it aside the bench, then picked up a pair of 65-pound dumbbells. He lay back and settled in for a quick set of skull crushers, bending his elbows and bringing the dumbbells down until they nearly touched his temples and up again. He had his iPod on shuffle and smiled when he heard the opening line of his latest favorite song, "Lose Control" by Missy Elliott, with that bangin' hottie Sierra and Fat Man Scoop. He did not notice when his toe bumped against the shaker cup, knocking it over on its side. The thick, protein-rich liquid began to ooze out of the imperfectly closed lid, forming a slippery chocolate puddle on the tile floor. Lewis let himself drift into the zone, pushing the weights to the beat of the song and thinking of all the things he'd like to do to Sierra. He wondered oddly if he would get Veronica to come down and blow him or something. She would usually drop everything any time he called, but she was visiting her grandmother in the hospital and might not be able to get away. Janina might be around, or maybe that white bitch he had been working on over the last weekend. He was going to have to get something lined up, no doubt. The steroids weren't just making him edgy, they were making him horny as hell. He remembered one of the older guys had told him that there were always a couple of sluts hanging around the sidelines looking to get with athletes. He'd have to go see what was what as soon as he was done with his set. A flash of movement caught his eye, and he looked up to see the last person on earth he expected to be here. Wendy pushed open the weight room doors and stepped inside. It looked almost like some sort of medieval torture chamber, done over in dingy white cinder block instead of crumbling stone. Strange chrome and black iron machines and implements rose up all over the room. All wheels and gears, cables and restraints, cuffs and hooks. She shivered. Everything in the room looked deadly. From somewhere towards the back came heavy, syncopated breathing and grunting. Other than that, the place was deserted. "Come on," Kevin said, leading her through the maze of metal. "This way." Lewis was lying back on a bench near the rear corner of the room. Tiny earbuds set in his ears, trailing white wires to the iPod strapped to his upper arm. He was sweating and focused, his breathing labored but steady, deep into his set. Wendy would never have thought in a million years that she'd be so happy to see the big dumb jerk. She had to stifle an urge to throw her arms around him. "Hey, Lewis," Kevin called, but they could hear the loud music coming from Lewis's earbuds from 10 paces away. Clearly, he couldn't hear them. "Lewis!" Kevin waved his arms and finally caught Lewis's eye. Lewis sat up, frowning, heavy dumbbell in each hand. "Fish?" he said, standing up and swinging his leg over the bench. "What the fuck are you doing here?" Several things happened in such rapid succession that Wendy could barely follow the sequence of events. Lewis's foot slipped in the puddle of protein shake beside the bench. He staggered and dropped the dumbbells. One dumbbell fell directly in front of him, tripping him as he sought to regain his balance with his other foot and sending him sprawling forward, face first into the seat of the leg press. The other dumbbell fell beside him and rolled towards the side of the leg press, smacking heavily into the imperfectly engaged lock that held up the massive load of weight. The lock let go and 1,080 pounds came slamming down like a falling safe in a cartoon. Only it wasn't funny, not even a little bit. Wendy sucked in a breathless little scream as Lewis's head burst like a water balloon, the violent impact sending up a hot spray of gore and sharp fragments of skull and teeth. Wendy and Kevin were utterly drenched from head to toe, bright red blood dripping down their noses, cheeks, and fingers. Wendy stood in stunned silence for a handful of seconds, watching as Lewis's limbs twitched and beat against the floor, and then went ominously still. Her eyes were drawn to the little display screen on the iPod strapped around his massive bicep. It read, "Lose control." Blood was dripping in her eyes, blurring her vision, and Wendy crumpled to her knees, the world around her going hollow and dim. She rubbed furiously at her eyes, trying to clear them, but her eyelashes kept sticking together, like that time when she had pink eye as a little girl. There were clots on her eyelashes. A huge wave of nausea hit, and she vomited onto the bloody floor for what felt like hours and hours, until she was as empty and fragile as an eggshell. She curled in on herself, clutching her stomach and making little tiny noises that seemed like they were coming from somewhere else. Someone was bothering her, pulling at her and badgering her about something, and she turned her head away from the noise. She was so tired, she just wanted to close her eyes for a few seconds, but the annoying person wouldn't stop. They kept on pulling her clothes and her wrists, forcing her to stand up, though her legs were weak as water. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 18 of Final Destination 3, the novelization by Christa Faust. Gotta say, I really enjoyed this chapter. We got a really good good story with the relationship between Wendy and Kevin. And, of course, we got the scene with Lewis, so R.I.P. Lewis, another name knocked off of Death's list. We're really getting to the end of the story here. Not too much left. Less than 100 pages to go in the book, which was like 415 pages long. I'm just so impressed with Christa Faust and her writing. She's so good with characters and like the relationships and the conversations with characters, and she even made a couple coaches interesting and gave them personality, and they only had a couple lines apiece. So I'm really impressed with Christa Faust. I really hope to interview her one day on the podcast or something, because she is just an amazing author, and I can't get enough of her work. I love the way she writes characters. And, and the way she wrote out the death scene for Lewis was brutal. I mean, I know in the movie it happens so fast, you don't really get a real big glimpse of it. But here in the book and all that detail, man, wow. She really wrote that whole thing with the weights and everything. Very gory, very graphic, very detailed, and color me impressed with that as well. I love in these books and movies of Final Destination all the little things, the little cause and effect things that happen. And the way she wrote that out was awesome. The lock not being fully engaged, him dropping the bottle, it spilling, him slipping, dropping the dumbbells. The way she brings it all together full circle was awesome. So yeah, as far as Chapter 18 goes, great chapter. I cannot wait to dive back into this one, which I'll do very soon. Until then, thank you so much for browsing in the 80 Slasher Library. This is your friendly neighborhood 80 Slasher Librarian signing off, saying thank you, be excellent to each other, and I'll see you soon. Tonight's upload is brought to you by our patrons on the Patreon page. That's Tony DeVore, Tyrone Kennard, Nick Velcarve, Jeffrey Quick, Daniel Mackey, David Arnold, Alex Vanover, Krista Campbell, Rob Davey, Jay Gardner, Willow Ravenwood, Lauren Vaught, Kristen Kay, Michael, William Schaefer, Liam Anderson, Bree, Bonanza Jellybean, Ryan Woodward, Allison Seib, Iron Alexa, Hawaii, Cecilia Spears, Sean Campbell, Catherine McClear, Simonoli, and Carl Eakins. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel on Patreon. I couldn't do this without you. The channel would not exist without you. So a million times thank you.
This is Zach